An 84-year-old lady could no longer live in her modest cabin, as her children had decided to send her to a nursing home. She then thought about donating her humble home to a homeless man who had always helped her, but her children disagreed. When the homeless man finally managed to enter the cabin, what he found inside left him astonished. Since her husband passed away, Susan had lived alone in a cabin in Texas. Throughout her life, she took care of herself, but the task was becoming increasingly challenging. At 84, she still tried to keep the place clean and well-maintained, even though her vitality wasn't what it used to be. One day, her eldest son called, insisting once again that it was time for her to accept the idea of moving to a retirement home. There, she would have healthcare professionals, activities to pass the time, and other people to interact with. After hearing all the arguments, Susan finally agreed to go to the nursing home. However, she wanted to know what would happen to her cabin and the small plot of land around it, which she'd maintained practically her whole life. The eldest son suggested selling the property and giving the money to Susan. The youngest proposed renovating and renting out the cabin to provide the family with a monthly income. Susan listened carefully, but had a different idea: donate the cabin as it was to David, the homeless man who had always helped her. The children didn't like the proposal and didn't trust David, but out of respect for Susan's age, they agreed to consider it. What neither David nor the family knew was that Susan would leave something more valuable in the cabin than the house itself. David, now 60, had lost his wife a decade ago, triggering a depression that deeply affected his life. David and Susan's paths crossed 3 years ago when he was living on the streets. One day, while returning from the market, Susan's bags tore open and fruit rolled into the street. David, noticing she was an elderly lady, promptly picked up the fruit and got another bag for her from a nearby store. From that encounter, David started helping Susan regularly, whether with shopping or small repairs around the cabin. Even though Susan insisted, David never accepted money as payment. He noticed that she lived entirely alone and without luxuries, and he was extremely grateful whenever he received a piece of cake with coffee made by Miss Susan's magical hands, as he would say. Over the years, these two lonely people became friends, and Susan even invited him to dinner at her house. They cultivated a mutual respect, and David always heeded Miss Susan's advice. He realized that his friend's depressive symptoms lessened when he was around, and he, in turn, felt useful helping the elderly lady with her daily needs. The day he learned that Susan was going to a nursing home was heartbreaking for David. His heart sank as he heard how the constant pressure from her children forced her to make this difficult decision. Susan shared that for the past 2 years, her children had insisted daily that she leave the cabin and land, and she no longer had the strength to deal with the family pressure. Though she wished to spend her last days in the cabin she had built with Benjamin, her late husband, Susan resignedly accepted that not all wishes can be fulfilled in this life. As they said goodbye, David hugged his friend and assured her that he would always be there if she needed help. He thanked Susan for giving him back his sense of dignity and the confidence to try to escape the homeless situation he was in. Shortly afterward, Susan was moved to the nursing home, with her family making all the decisions without consulting her, to avoid debates and confrontations. David did not witness Susan's move. His intuition told him she had already left, since he hadn't seen her around town anymore. Even so, he continued visiting the cabin to ensure everything was in order. On one of those occasions, he was unlucky enough to come across Susan's children on the property. As he approached and introduced himself, he inquired about his friend, but was rudely received. The eldest son drove him away, accusing him of wanting money for alcohol or to sustain his addictions. Despite the harsh treatment, David didn't let it drive him away from Susan. Without information about the nursing home she had been sent to, he decided to find out on his own. He went to the city's homeless shelter, where he searched for a list of nursing homes. He discovered there were only 4 options, 2 downtown, 1 in a more remote neighborhood, and the last one on the outskirts of the city. Determined, David decided to visit each of them to find his friend. After taking a shower at the shelter and leaving early the next morning, David started his journey. The first 2 nursing homes were nearby, but Susan wasn't there. After a 40-minute walk, he reached the 3rd home, where there was a Margaret, but she wasn't his Susan. Undeterred, David continued for another hour to the main road, which would lead him to the final nursing home on the list. Walking tirelessly, David tried to hitchhike along the way, but had no luck. After about 3 hours, he saw the nursing home on the horizon. Tired and thirsty, he approached, well aware that he wasn't young anymore. Upon entering the facility, David felt this was the decisive moment. Susan had to be there. At the reception, he didn't bother asking for Margaret. Confidently, he stated that he would like to visit Margaret, the newcomer. The receptionist hesitated for a moment but confirmed that Margaret was indeed there. David then claimed to be her brother, a necessary lie to gain permission, knowing that simply being a friend would not meet the facility's policies. Even with the warning that visiting hours were about to end, he requested to see Susan and was led to her room. Upon entering, David found Susan lying down, looking ill. It was an unfamiliar sight, as he had never seen her so frail. However, when she noticed David at the door, her eyes lit up, and a genuine smile spread across her face. David approached slowly, still gauging Susan's condition. But she impatiently signaled with her hands for him to come closer and whispered something in his ear that sent shivers down his spine. "Is this for real? Seriously?" he asked, incredulous. Susan gave him a few pats on the cheek, squeezed his hand, and confirmed that yes, everything in the cabin was his. After a while, a staff member informed them that visiting hours had ended, forcing David to leave. He still didn't fully understand the meaning of Susan's words. The next morning, David gathered the last few coins he had and bought a simple bouquet of flowers. He made the long journey back to the nursing home, only to discover that his friend had passed away that night. The news hit him hard, and he cried right there. The receptionist, noticing his distress, wanted to know if he had been informed by his brother. David didn't respond and walked away, letting the tears wash over his face. David returned to the cabin, now supposedly his, as per Susan's last words. However, he didn't feel any joy. With a copy of the key hidden in the spot Susan had indicated, he had no trouble getting inside. Though the gift was a house, at that moment, it just seemed empty. He decided to make coffee, just as Susan used to make for him. When he opened the highest cabinet in the kitchen to find the coffee, a cardboard box at the front fell to the floor, making a considerable noise. As he picked it up, he noticed it was heavy, and when he opened it to ensure nothing was broken, he was left breathless by what he found inside. There were several bundles of cash, an amount David had only seen in movie suitcases. He placed everything on the table and watched for several minutes, pondering its meaning. There were over 40 bundles of $10,000 each, totaling nearly $500,000, a fortune that David deduced was the savings of a lifetime. He recalled that Susan had confirmed that the cabin and everything in it were now his. Even so, he hesitated for a moment. But in the end, he gathered all the bundles into an old, faded leather bag and headed for the door. He knew exactly what to do. In the following days, David undertook a modest renovation of the cabin, just enough to make it more presentable, without removing the original features that Susan and her husband had envisioned. He arranged the former residents' personal belongings like a museum exhibit, highlighting the essence and story contained in that space. On the living room wall, he hung a beautiful photo of Susan and kept a candle burning just below it. David didn't do this for the property or the money he had found, but to honor the friendship he had with the elderly woman. Within days, Susan's 2 sons arrived at the cabin, surprised to find David living there. They asked him what he thought he was doing, and David was honest. He told them he had visited Susan at the nursing home before she passed away, and that she had left the cabin and everything in it to him. The sons doubted the story, believing David was a homeless man with mental problems. How could a house that had belonged to their parents be simply given to a man they hardly knew? David regretted their lack of trust in his story, and said he regretted even more that they were Susan's sons and did not understand their own mother's final wishes. Upon hearing this, the younger son wanted to attack David, but was stopped by the older one, who reminded him of the legal consequences. They decided to call the police. A patrol car with 2 officers soon arrived at the cabin. After hearing the situation, the officers asked David to show some documentation to prove his version. David, however, had nothing but Susan's word. Therefore, the officers told him he would have to leave the residence immediately. The younger son insisted that even if David left the property, he had trespassed and would not go unpunished. He decided to file a complaint to have David removed from circulation for good. David was deeply hurt by the situation. Children who didn't respect their own mother's wishes. He couldn't hold back the tears and asked for a few moments to pack his personal belongings. Seeing that the cabin was indeed cleaner and in better condition, the older son granted the destitute man a few minutes. David took his old blanket, which was draped over a chair, and placed it inside the old, faded leather suitcase, covering what was already inside. Before leaving, he cast a final look at the sanctuary he had prepared for his friend and surrendered to the authorities without causing further trouble. He didn't want to give Susan's sons more ammunition or worsen his situation. Despite the unfavorable scenario, David was no fool. He had a good idea of what to do. Susan's sons were far from imagining what would happen in the coming weeks. The younger son did not drop the charges, and upon arriving at the police station, David was only spared jail time because he had no criminal record. However, he was instructed to quickly seek a public attorney to represent him in court. After being released, David went to the shelter where he spent his nights and consulted the caretaker, who suggested a law firm through an advertisement in the city services book. Meanwhile, Susan's children acted swiftly. They filed a restraining order against David to keep him away from the cabin and put it up for sale for $80,000, not bothering to remove the furniture, decorations, or personal items. Their main goal was to sell the property quickly. A week went by, and lawyer Michael Winter showed interest in purchasing the property to use as a vacation home. Susan's children were eager to negotiate with the highest bidder. When Michael Winter reached out to them, the children revealed that the highest offer they had so far was $90,000, paid in 3 separate installments. Michael made an impressive counteroffer, $91,000 in cash, with full payment up front, provided the deal was closed immediately. The children didn't hesitate to accept, scheduling the final exchange of keys for the money 7 days later. The children were thrilled about the sale, intending to use the week to dispose of their parents' junk left in the cabin. However, Michael Winter suggested he'd be willing to pay an additional $1,000 if the cabin was left exactly as it was. Eager for more money, Susan's children agreed to close the deal for $92,000, promising not to remove anything from the house. 7 days after the phone negotiation, Susan's children arrived at the cabin to finalize the sale of their parents' property. A luxury sedan parked nearby, and a sharply dressed man, Michael Winter, stepped out of the car. After exchanging pleasantries, Michael and the children began the transaction. The lawyer opened a suitcase, revealing stacks of cash. He handed it to the younger brother, who verified the amount and nodded to the older brother. The latter then handed an envelope with the documents and the cabin key to Michael. "Congratulations, Michael. This is now your new vacation home," the older brother said. But Michael held up his hand and replied, "Don't congratulate me, gentlemen. I'm not the actual owner of this remarkable cabin." The children exchanged confused glances, unable to comprehend what was happening. "I'm just the negotiator," Michael explained. At that moment, the second passenger of the luxury sedan stepped out of the car, wearing a tailored suit, neatly trimmed beard and hair, and shiny, impeccable shoes. Susan's children vaguely recognized the man but couldn't place him. When he faced them directly, they realized it was David, the homeless man. "This is the gentleman who's purchasing the property. The money in the suitcase belongs to him. Please hand over the keys and documents to him," said Michael. Susan's children were stunned, not sure whether to feel deceived or humiliated, but with the agreed sum in the suitcase, they had no choice. The older brother, with a look of deep resentment, handed the key and envelope to David. "You never knew the true wishes of your mother, Susan," David declared. "You did everything to keep me away from her and what remained of her, but apparently, she knew her children well enough to leave me what I needed to make sure her will was fulfilled." Except for the lawyer, no one understood how the homeless man had gotten that money. They were unaware that they were receiving part of their own mother's inheritance. Now, David could legally keep the cabin. "I'm going to live in this cabin and honor everything Susan and your father built. I'll see you in court. Use this money to hire a good lawyer in the case you've filed against me, because you'll need it," David said. "Now leave my property, or I'll have to call the police." With those words, David left Susan's children behind and closed the cabin door. He relit the candle beneath Susan's photo and slept peacefully that night in his new home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and click the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.